Hi everyone, it's Yoon and today is our update on my current body modifications. The last tattoo slash piercing video that I did was 4 years ago and I filled up a lot more of my canvas since then. I'm also opening up the space to get into the nitty-gritty details about each experience, especially my scarification, because I know that you guys had a lot of questions on that one. Since I'll be expanding on the process of scarification, heavy topics like self-harm and mutilation will be discussed, so please view this video at your discretion. I can't include photos of the entire healing process because of YouTube's terms of services, but when I update my website, I'll include them there. Much of my mindset hasn't changed about how tattoos are landmarks of history in our body, but since my last video, I've undergone a plethora of new emotions that I've had a lot of time to reflect on while getting these past, specifically 3 tattoos. Currently, I can count about 7 body modifications that I've done in total, including the ones that I talked about in my previous video. This doesn't count my piercings. I do remember mentioning that I wanted 7 or 14 tattoos here and there online, but we're already at 7 and my full vision hasn't been realized yet. I'll take you through the inspirations behind my last 3 tattoos, the artists who brought them to life, basically the who, what, where, when, and whys. Let's answer a couple of questions first. How much research do you tend to do before committing to an art decision? So I usually keep up with artists via their social media. I observe their works, how they talk about their pieces, and if they post about their daily life outside of tattooing, I try to keep up with that too. Their politics and design philosophy really matter to me, especially since I'll be receiving a piece of their soul, and through this I'll become this kind of living museum as a culmination of sorts. Ever since my large shoulder piece, these marked the first modifications where I allowed the artist to just freely use my body as a canvas. I actually did realize recently that I tend not to go for artists' flash designs, but when researching their work, I used their flash and also their previous works to understand their style better. Since I prefer to travel for my tattoos, it's a little bit difficult to sit down and actually do a consultation. So when I inquire about designs, I basically give the general idea and our communication starts from there. Do you aim to have your mods connect thematically or do they work as standalone pieces? How do you plan out going from one single piece to a whole set that intertwines with all of it? How do you make a final decision with your body mod slash tats? And how long have you been wanting this scarification slash tattoo before committing to it? In the past, my smaller tattoos worked more as standalone pieces, especially because they were so spread out. But when I decided on the shoulder tattoos, I knew that I wanted to connect all of my future modifications together. Actually, before my shoulder piece, I drew like this little caricature of myself with all the potential placements and the potential artists that I'd want to contact, and also what style I would prefer. In my mind, if I were to fully undress myself, I want to have all the pieces framing my body and working together to make one full picture. Of course, I'm not so rigid as to keep the same potential tattoo ideas that I'd had years ago, especially because I think that limits my mind from growing and opening up. And in addition to this, I restrict myself to 1 major body modification per year, just because I like to sit with the idea long enough to know that I actually truly want it and that it's actually something that resonates. I feel like a lot can change in a year, so limiting myself with this restriction ensures that I've reflected about it enough. This is just a personal code though, because I've been trying to practice impulse control among different areas of my life. Do you have any reservations about getting bigger pieces done after only having smaller stuff? With the direction that I want to take for my future pieces, it's all about tying everything together. So connecting all of these smaller tattoos and thinking of them as details while getting the bigger ones as paths. It's kind of like when you're taking a stroll and every little thing you see just becomes so beautiful and brings so much joy, and then you realize that the in-between moments and your entire city are quite beautiful in their own way. Let's get into the first piece that we're going to talk about today, which is this blood spill across my shoulders. I had this done in March of 2025, and I found my artist Chotze on Xiaohongshu about a year before our appointment. Once I saw his works, I just knew I wanted his pieces. I just think that he captures fluidity in such a marvelous way, and I'll expand more on that later. A few weeks before my trip, he actually asked me to send a picture of my shoulders just so he could draft the design. And the concept was this blood spilling across my shoulders from hurting others and just a reminder of that state. At the time, there was this huge revelation that I'm very capable of hurting others even when it's not intentional, and there are times where I'll have to live with no absolution of my sins. So I get to Shanghai and I'm super nervous because it's my first time there. I'd never been to China before, but luckily I did meet an old friend who showed me around. When I got to the studio, we chatted for a bit, but At the time I was super shy, so I was very nervous and I had to very heavily rely on Google Translate. There we discussed the concept of having this weight on my shoulders, kind of like a very visible burden, and it being very encroaching and very violent. We started on the left side, and even though he had drafted something beforehand, he didn't print out a stencil. It was 3 or 4 hours of him freehanding this design using his previous sketch as a reference. Chotza had me sitting, lying down, standing up, moving my arms in different directions, all while he drew, erased, and then redrew these lines. I think at the time it just like blew my mind, like, whoa, this is somebody that respects that every body he works with is different, is unique, and I feel like he respects their individual contours. Because my tattoos before this were smaller, they were of course still hand-drawn, but stencils were used. They didn't take up a large enough portion of my canvas. Because this area moves a lot, it didn't feel like this design was just stamped on. I really liked that he developed his style enough to be recognizable, but was still able to give his clients something that was tailored to their bodies. After the drafting, we got to tattooing, and it was about another 4 hours with a break about each hour. It was mostly silent between the two of us, but we did crack some jokes. And I remember that the tattoo needle that he used for the entire thing was, I think, like a very fine line one. It was a very thin cartridge or needle. So even the more filled in areas here, the more opaque ones, he did use fine line for that. We got the left side done that first evening and then repeated the same process, about 3 to 4 hours of drafting, 3 to 4 hours of tattooing, the next day for the right side. When we finally finished the entire thing, we waited about 2 hours or so for the swelling to go down, and we took photos that evening. I think we finished around 2 a.m. It actually wasn't until after the tattoo that I really opened up to him about my experience and my reasoning behind it. And we stayed up on WeChat pretty late the next few evenings just talking about future projects. I asked him to give the piece a name and also what it meant for him, especially because it was his artwork. And getting this tattoo was definitely a very transformative experience and reshaped my approach for my future tattoos. And I would rate the pain scale for this to be maybe 7 out of 10, since it was my first bigger piece and I don't think that I ate enough or wore proper clothing given the fact that Shanghai is still pretty cold during March. The most notable sensitive points were my collarbones, right where this edge is, where it's less fleshy on the shoulder, and also my sternum. I feel like when he covered this area, I like really felt it in my bones. When people ask me, how did you get those scars on your back? I usually just tell them, oh, it's God, he ripped my angel wings off. They usually don't inquire any further than that, but when they do, I try to explain the entire thing. I was really inspired by seeing these paintings of Armin Levinov, the anime Haibane Renmei, and also the statue that I saw on my trip to Shanghai in 2025 of Ghostblade's Yan. I also replayed one of my favorite older games, Pandora's Tower, and I was really drawn to her transformation to this very disfigured monster. Now, I've made a plethora of wings for my project unit, but I think I stopped being inspired to make more simply because the imagery of angels, I didn't really feel like that fit me at that point. Now, when I saw those works that I was inspired by, it really opened my eyes to the aftermath of fallen grace and also what that might look like in our current world. I see angels every day, but I think the fallen ones tend to be shunned by society, or we tend to keep that to ourselves. I constantly ask myself, what happens when you've lived your entire life just trying to be good, and at some point you just can't take it anymore? I'm Filipino, so I grew up Catholic. There was always this feeling of an omnipresent being constantly watching over me to pressure me to be good, to be afraid of committing sin. I think my relationship to my mom, who's a very devout Catholic, also compounded onto this quiet yet very present feeling of guilt. Now, funnily enough, my favorite character, Rin Soma, from my favorite series of all time, Fruits Basket, also has this large scar on her back. And when I got these wing scars, I somehow felt like I understood this very fundamental development in her character arc. I don't know why I didn't put 2 and 2 together before, but I think it makes sense. She literally got that scar from being pushed out of a 2-story window by Akito, who represents God in their family. Some other things that inspired me were John Steinbeck's East of Eden, the movie The Prophecy, and also just biblical interpretations of Lucifer the Fallen Angel. I view this piece as another addition to this blood spilling across my shoulders, as it highlights the journey of being exiled from heaven, or to overcome my ego and truly live as a human being. It's a punishment from God, who took my wings because I abused my free will. Living as a human now, I had to learn to accept my faults and accept the fact that I can hurt others. I had to find this new equilibrium in life so I don't lose my own self-awareness and actually learn to live with other people. I believe that living with others only truly starts when we understand and we accept ourselves. And while this idea of embracing our multifacetedness is this core theme of my project unit, this fall from heaven and practicing forgiveness of myself was a visceral reminder to practice my values. It's only as a human that I can experience this constant cycle of hurt and forgiveness, and I think that's a more interesting journey than being restricted to heaven with angel wings. When drafting the design myself, I did specify to the artist that I wanted them to look very torn off as opposed to a clean slice. I also referenced this artist's anatomy for a winged being. It was very important to me that the placement actually made sense in my personal anatomy. This is an insane story, and I even journaled afterwards that meeting them was kismet. Right after I'd come back from China with my shoulder tattoos, I actually redid my sketch of future modifications. I initially put fallen angel wing tattoos, then I thought, that's not enough. It needs to be the real thing. I also think that seeing too many bad fake blood, fake scarf, or fake bruise tattoos, and especially thinking about how their healed outcome fades over time, made me think this is really corny. Thus, the conclusion that I came to was that it has to be scarification. Now, at the time I lived in Seattle, so it wasn't uncommon for my friends and I to drive up to Vancouver for a day trip. On one particular trip, maybe 2 or 3 months after I had sketched out this fallen angel wing design, we visited the Richmond night market, and while we were walking around the fair, I just see these 2 beautiful people all dressed up. Very colorful, very well put together punk outfits, and we'd pass by them. I'm still super shy, so we end up just passing each other this first time. And I kept beating myself up for not going up to them and complimenting them. We walk around some more, and we pass by them again, so I run over to them, I tell them I love their outfits, and they tell me they actually recognize me from Xiaohongshu. So we ended up exchanging Instagrams to keep in touch with each other. And when I looked through their Instagrams, specifically Rabbit's, I noticed that they had an alternative page where they did tattoos, piercings, and scarification. It was unbelievable to me because prior to this day trip, I finally told my friends I'd settled on the idea of scarification, but I couldn't find an artist close enough by us to contact. It took me well over a year to actually contact Rabbit and tell them about the process, but we settled on October of 2025 to get it done. And I have a really high pain tolerance. Not that I don't feel pain or am more numb to it, but in the way that it does make me squeamish or faint from very extreme experiences. We didn't discuss using anesthesia beforehand, so I didn't really expect any, but that didn't deter me from going through with it. After we finished, I journaled about my experience immediately, so I'll just read it here. On the day itself, the pain was manageable. The process is as such. We outline, then deeper outline to ensure the skin is cut through, then peeling. I used 2 different types of medical scalpels to get it done. Outlining felt the most similar to tattooing, though the outside upper part of my shoulder and the very lower parts stung more. We worked on the right side first, took 5 to 10 minute breaks after each segment of the process. It wasn't the outlining but the peeling that was the worst part. If I didn't think about or see what exactly was happening, I could reimagine it as being tattooed, or even my cat just stepping all over my back with her claws out. But the sensation of the peeling was akin to pulling away a very sticky band-aid or trying to peel hair removal wax from the skin very painstakingly slowly. I don't remember screaming or shouting during the first side, just instead opting for various breathing techniques. My core was bracing itself with every slice, and my arms were gripping the side of the table every single time. Rabbit's composed demeanor and stories of her other clients helped me to curb any paranoia about malpractice. They often urged me to let them know if we needed a break, needed to stop, or if I needed any more sugar in my system. I'm very stubborn. With a very shaky and likely unconvincing voice, I reassured her that I'd take breaks once each step was complete. After the right side was finished, they cleaned it and applied a white powder used to stop bleeding. I can only describe it as putting salt on a wound. Very icy hot, and probably the worst part of the entire thing, for about 2 minutes. One side took about 2.5 hours, 3 including breaks. That's about 45 minutes for the outlining and 45 to an hour for healing. We took a longer break after one side was finished, and Rabbit offered me some guava candies to up my sugar. We debated doing the left side in another session, like the next day, and honestly the thought of finding relief for a day, then going back to break a new pain barrier yet again while one side was still healing, I told them I can endure it for today. The left side was arguably worse, and I wondered why. Rabbit explained that my body was beginning to tire itself and lose energy the longer the session was, and offered me some food. I'm stubborn. I told them that I'd eat a big meal afterwards to replenish my nutrients, and that my squirming and grunts of pain were just me being dramatic. On this side, they outlined it deeper, then asked if I could continue with the peeling. We took a very short break, got some more fresh air outside, and then began the peeling. I felt more sensitive and braced myself even more. At some point, Rabbit would update me on the percentage of skin left to peel. It did help a little and turned the experience from something I had to stay present in to one whose ending I felt hopeful for. When I read up on other people's blogs about their scarification process, everyone talked about how the healing was worse than the actual process itself, and I didn't believe them, but they were right. The healing is just very insanely itchy. How did they build up the thickness on your scarring? Does the skin you scarified feel permanently numb after healing? After the wounds developed a significant amount of scar tissue, which happened about 3 weeks post-process, I was agitating them every single day via light scratching and also using a soft bristled toothbrush to brush over the scar tissue. I'm not gonna lie, I did originally have doubts, especially because they initially healed flat in a very reddish brown tissue. But they were more pronounced around the 3rd month and much more swollen. I only noticed around month 3 that the scar itself was losing healing, because one day I got really itchy and I accidentally dug my nail in a little bit too hard, and it actually cut through the scar and left a crescent-shaped nail wound. Around month 6, I noticed that the itchiness actually came from the skin around the scar, not the scar itself. By then, it had actually become so numb, and I have no sensation left on the most middle part of the scar. Were you scared about doing the scarification at first? Surprisingly, no. Just because I trusted my practitioner a lot based on their previous works. And also, they gave me very thorough pre- and post-care instructions. But to be honest, I never really think about the physical pain of things preemptively, just because I try to not borrow grief from the future. I know it's gonna hurt, but that's such a small sacrifice in the grand scheme of how long it's gonna be on me. Throughout the entire thing though, I just had to keep reassuring myself, this too shall pass, this too shall pass. And at the time, I was heavily meditating daily, so my relationship with stress had gotten a lot better. Did you get to keep the pieces cut off from your back scarification? I saw them, and I really wanted to, but Rabbit had already cleaned up their station before I could ask. I think it would have been so gnarly though. However, the skin also did shrivel up to like 1/8 of a slice of bacon by then. Do you have opinions on former self-harming people to get one done? This actually came across my mind a lot when I was conceptualizing it, especially because scarification is a much more involved mutilation than, let's say, getting ear piercings. When I was younger, I used to cope with these kind of turbulent emotions inside of me via self-harm in various forms. Yet the feeling of planning this specific mutilation was definitely but not entirely different. I prefer not to go under any anesthesia when I'm doing tattoos, just because I think that the feeling of pain is very grounding. There are times where I have these on and off bouts of kind of like my soul leaving my body, or kind of like this tiny version of me piloting my body and my eyes are just the windshield. So body mods are one of the very few safe spaces in life where I can subject myself to such physical pain, and one of the only things that allow me to be truly present in that moment. It's like, oh god, I'm me right now and I am experiencing this pain. So even if I had this inner thing eating me in the inside and everything was chaotic, I could at least focus my pain in that moment to be physical and not mental. It's kind of like a sense of escapism. But that's not so far from why I would choose to harm myself when I was younger. I ended up talking to my more heavily tattooed friends about their reasoning, and some of them returned with similar sentiments, that at least the pain was more controlled and that a piece of art was left behind. After my shoulder piece, my tattoo artist did tell me that some of his clients asked him to tattoo over their healed self-harm scars to discourage them from choosing this coping mechanism in the future. I'm able to recognize now that it's a very unhealthy one, but that does make me more empathetic towards others who still struggle with doing it or still struggle with stopping. After all, healing as a process isn't linear. In that way, I think that tattooing is this way to be less ashamed about our struggles and to forgive ourselves more every day. Even in my own choice to undergo scarification, I akin it to God punishing me for my sins. So even then, there's this self-perception, inner self-talk of I have to atone. The only difference I can think of now is that this one was way more planned out and way less impulsive than my previous habits. I don't think we should look past the fact that scarification is more of a mutilation than tattooing or piercings are, especially because most of the scarification that people see online are pieces that are usually 1 or 2 years or more healed. In my mind, I think that the reasoning, the choice to undergo any form of pain is something that we have to examine within ourselves, however we may choose to do it. Would you recommend scarification, and did you have to change your lifestyle around it? I think it's a very different plane of modification than tattooing is, and the healing process takes a lot of patience compared to the latter. There's also a lot more risks because it's more difficult to find a qualified scarification artist, so I can't say that I would encourage it or discourage it. It's just a different form of body modification to me. I wanted to talk about my experience more to inform others about what the process may look like, but it really is up to personal discretion about whether you'd want to do it or if you prefer tattoos. My lifestyle during the first few days to 1 month was completely different, seeing as I had to keep a closer eye to it and use ointment, bandages, and let it air out while it developed that scar tissue. I also had to invest in a lot of clothing that wouldn't cause friction to irritate it. So in turn, I have a lot more backless dresses and shirts now. Also, I was going to Tai Chi classes at the time, and I had to take about a 3-week break because our uniforms cover that spot, and moving around made me feel like my skin was stretching and like breaking apart. After the 5th week, I was pretty confidently moving around again. I could go to the gym, but I did lessen my cardio and worked more on mobility. Even now, I have to avoid scratching the scar itself super heavily just because I don't want a repeat of it breaking open with my nail. And the skin is still thinner than my natural skin. I've also cut off most of the tags in my clothing that irritated. I think the pain scale of my scarification was only about an 8 out of 10. This is because I take into consideration my later tattoos and cumulatively of the entire experience. Surprisingly, it was actually very meditative. The healing process, because it took so long, it took months, to me it was way worse than the 6 hours total I got getting my back carved out. Finally, we're here at the last part of this trilogy, which is this scripture on my back by Yorgos Kazakis. When I did my initial sketch, I thought of doing a blood spill as though the wound was still open, but when I looked back on it over months, I just thought, it looks too corny. So instead, I wanted to frame my wings and kind of build this plate or armor around it. Even in my initial inquiry with Yorgos, the idea was to have plates like an android skin, kind of like this one scene in Ex Machina. That fit my vision way more, but I still had to sit down and really think about it for months. I found Yorgos' work a couple years ago, but I didn't actually start keeping up with his social media until about a year ago. When I decided that I did want this kind of frame or seal of my scars, I ended up reaching out to him earlier this year in January. And to make it really easy, there's a booking site, and his assistant helped me to set a date for his tattoo because his schedule was very busy months later on. I traveled to Berlin for this tattoo, and before we even discussed the idea of the tattoo itself, Yorgos and I talked for maybe 2 or 3 hours about our interests in philosophy, psychoanalysis, and our shared goal of world building through our works. It was really fascinating to hear about his journey as an artist and what tattooing means to him. So when I told him about the lore behind my torn off angel wings, he mentioned Haibane Ranmei, and we bonded over other older games that we played. If I recall correctly, his tattoo philosophy is to interpret the wearer's inner psyche, their ambitions, their fears, whatever they open up to him about, and for him to communicate what he feels is hidden inside of them. I really liked this very extensive, open communication between the two of us, and at this point, I was very confident in just letting him do whatever the heck he wants. I did express that I'd like to keep my theme of having red ink going, which he did indulge in. We took some before process photos and videos of my back. Then he drafted a design freehandedly on my back with a tattoo marker. The initial sketch itself was very bare bones, and the idea was that this is a seal or harness to suppress your wings, but there's still a chance for them to burst out. There's this sense of ashiness, kind of like burnt feathers, that it shouldn't look like it's a tattoo it should look like a relic that is on you. By then, I was pretty satisfied with the composition, so we got to work. I ate a full meal beforehand, but before he started, he offered me some cola to get my blood sugar up. We tattooed for about 2 hours or so, just comparing our lives in Germany versus the States, more about Haibane Renmei, all while the soundtrack from this game that he holds very close to his heart was playing throughout the studio. After we got the outlines done, we took a break to eat dinner. It was actually very sweet because his wife visited the studio and his sister even offered me some of the very delicious and nutritious dinner that she had cooked for them. So at this point I felt very taken care of. The food that she prepared was phenomenal and that was a very much needed break. After dinner, during the second stage, he asked to put in his own earbuds to listen to his own music, just so he could really focus in on the tattoo and really get in the zone. I was very happy to say go for it, mostly because I realized it was more painful to actively engage in conversation while getting tattooed than it was to meditate and focus on the feeling. After reviewing the first few markings, we both agreed on using darker reds and also black ink to create contrast. Even though I'm super stubborn on only using red ink, I agreed to this almost immediately, since our idea of the charred branding couldn't be fully articulated if we didn't use a darker color for contrast. Now, my body was already losing a lot of adrenaline by this part, and I kept mentally telling myself, should I ask for a break? I think I should ask for a break. When I looked over my back, I just didn't want to interrupt Yorgos because he was really getting into the zone, and I could tell he was having so much fun, just adding so much more layering to the piece. He introduced a lot more detail to the tattoo during this time, and he even extended it to the back of my neck, which was a very new feeling, but it wasn't painful at all. I think it's in these details that really give the soul to the piece. After about another 2 to 3 hours, we finally finished up the entire thing. We waited to take photos of the final piece until a few days afterwards when my back was less inflamed. So here they are. I think I would actually give the pain rating on this a 10 out of 10. Actually worse during the process than scarification was. Specifically, the areas around my scar, this area underneath my arm, and the lines that he extended onto my ribs that were the worst areas. I think my overall approach to body modifications is to interpret a memory or have it represent a part of the journey that made me who I am today. I want my future modifications to still hold on to those values, just so I can look back and find love in who I was at whatever stage of life I was in. It's very easy to cringe at your younger self, but they're who made you who you are today. So you have to find love in them. A lot of people have asked me, do you have a favorite tattoo? But it's really hard to point to just one because they're all connected to a specific memory and feelings in a moment of time, and in meeting so many different artists that brought me experiences that are simply incomparable to one another. When I look at my collection as a whole, I kind of see this timeline of my life, and that's one of my favorite parts of getting tattoos. As your life changes, your tastes evolve, your interests shift, you have so many experiences that shape you, your collection grows alongside you. Tattoos also connect people together, whether you're just an enthusiast, a canvas, or even an artist. If you're watching and thinking about getting your first tattoo, I think my biggest piece of advice would be to make sure that it's something that feels very right for you. Trends come and go, your feelings will always change, and everyone has different ideas of what makes a good tattoo. The world is very open. It's not as archaic anymore, it's not as textbook. I think you should just definitely sit down and think about it. But this process does look very different for everyone. Some people don't take months or years like I do to decide on something that they truly want. Also, don't feel pressured to get something because you're gonna be admiring it the most at the end of the day. As I continue adding to my collection, I do have specific ideas of what I'd like to add on to my current body mods, and I have an idea of the artists I'd love to get in touch with to make them happen together. But still, nothing is set in stone. While this update covers a trilogy that I have right now, it definitely isn't the end of my journey. There will always be new experiences, new inspiration, and new chapters waiting to be represented in my future mods. I'm pretty excited to meet you there in the future. I hope that you can keep expressing yourself, keep creating, keep collecting stories worth remembering, and most importantly, fall in love with your journey more and more every single day.